You. Without order, there is chaos. Without order, there is pain. The wheel turns. Lives are forfeit. 7 masters, 7 ways of killing. This time it will be fire. 9 will burn. So it has been decreed, and so it must be. The wheel is already turning. There is an order to things, and at the center of all of it, is you. Chapter 1. The serial killer sitting across from me had his son's eyes. The same shape, the same color. But the glint in those eyes, the light of anticipation, that's wholly your own. Experience, and my FBI mentors, had taught me that I could delve further into other people's minds by talking to them than by talking about them. Giving in to the urge to profile, I continued to appraise the man across from me. You'll hurt me if you can. I knew that. Had known it even before coming to this maximum security prison and seeing the subtle smile that crossed Daniel Redding's lips the moment his gaze met mine. Hurting me will hurt the boy. I sank deeper and deeper into Redding's psychopathic perspective, and the boy is yours to hurt. It didn't matter that Daniel Redding's hands were cuffed together and chained to the table. It didn't matter that there was an armed FBI agent at the door. The man in front of me was one of the world's most brutal serial killers, and if I let him past my defenses, he would burn his mark into my soul as surely as he'd branded the letter R onto the flesh of his victims. Bind them, brand them, cut them, hang them. That was how Redding had killed his victims. But that wasn't what had brought me here today. You told me once that I would never find the man who killed my mother, I said, sounding calmer than I felt. I knew this particular psychopath well enough to know that he would try to get a rise out of me. You'll try to burrow into my mind, to plant questions and doubts, so that when I walk out of this room, a part of you goes with me. That was what Redding had done months ago when he'd dropped that bombshell about my mother, and that was why I was here now. Did I say that? Redding asked with a slow and subtle smile. It does sound like something I might have mentioned, but... He lifted his shoulders in an elaborate shrug. I folded my hands on the table and waited. You're the one who wanted me to come back here. You're the one who set the lure. This is me taking the bait. Eventually, Redding broke the silence. You must have something else to say to me. Redding had an organized killer's capacity for patience, but only on his own terms, not on mine. After all, he continued, a low hum in his voice, you and I have so very much in common. I knew he was referencing my relationship with his son, and I knew that to get what I wanted, I'd have to acknowledge that. You're talking about Dean. The moment I said Dean's name, Redding's twisted smile deepened. My boyfriend, and fellow natural, didn't know that I was here. He would have insisted on coming with me, and I couldn't do that to him. Daniel Redding was a master of manipulation. But nothing he said could possibly hurt me the way every word out of his mouth would have shredded Dean. Does my son fancy himself in love with you? Redding leaned forward, his cuffed hands folding in imitation of my own. Do you tiptoe into his room at night? Does he bury his hands into your hair? Redding's expression softened. When Dean cradles you in his arms, he murmured, his voice taking on a musical lilt. Do you ever wonder just how close he is to snapping your neck? It must bother you, I said softly. To know so incredibly little about your own son. If Redding wanted to hurt me, he'd have to do better than trying to make me doubt Dean. If he wanted what he said to haunt me for days and weeks to come, he'd have to hit me where I was most vulnerable, where I was weak. It must bother you, Redding parroted my own words back at me, to know so incredibly little about what happened to your own mother. The image of my mom's blood-soaked dressing room surged to the front of my mind, but I schooled my face into a neutral expression. I'd set Redding up to hit me where it hurt, and in doing so, I'd steered the conversation exactly where I wanted it to go. "Isn't that why you're here?" Redding asked me, his voice velvety and low. "To find out what I know about your mother's murder?" "I'm here," I said, staring him down, "because I know that when you swore to me that I would never find the man who killed my mother, you were telling the truth." Each of the 5 teenagers in the FBI's Naturals program had a specialty. Mine was profiling. Leah Zhang's was deception detection. Months ago, she'd pegged Redding's taunting words about my mother as true. I could feel Leah on the other side of the two-way mirror now, ready to separate every sentence I got out of Dean's father into truth and lies. Time to lay my cards on the table. "What I want to know," I told the killer in front of me, enunciating each word, "is exactly what kind of truth you were telling. When you guaranteed me that I would never find the man who murdered my mother, was that because you thought she'd been murdered by a woman?" I paused. "Or did you have reason to believe that my mother was still alive?" 10 weeks. That was how long we'd been looking for a lead, any lead, no matter how small. On the cabal of serial killers who'd faked my mother's death nearly 6 years earlier, the group that had held her captive ever since. "This isn't a casual visit, is it?" Redding leaned back in his chair, tilting his head to the side as his eyes, Dean's eyes, made a detached study of mine. "You haven't simply reached a tipping point. My words haven't been slowly eating away at you for months. You know something." I knew that my mother was alive. I knew that those monsters had her. And I knew that I would do anything, make a deal with any devil to bring them down. To bring her home. "What would you say," I asked Redding, "if I told you that there was a society of serial killers, one that operated in secret, killing 9 victims every 3 years? I could hear the intensity in my own voice. I didn't even sound like myself. "What would you say if I told you that this group is steeped in ritual, that they've been killing for more than a century, and that I am going to be the one to bring them down?" Redding leaned forward. "I suppose I'd say that I wish I could be there to see what this group will do to you for coming after them, to watch them take you apart, piece by piece." "Keep going, you sick monster. Keep telling me what they'll do to me. Tell me everything you know." Redding paused suddenly, then chuckled. "Clever girl, aren't you? Getting me talking like that. I can understand what my boy sees in you." A muscle in my jaw ticked. I'd almost had him. I'd been this close. "Do you know your Shakespeare, girl?" Among his plethora of charming qualities, the serial killer across from me had a fondness for the bard. "To thine own self be true?" I suggested darkly, racking my brain for a way to reel him back in, to make him tell me what he knew. Redding smiled, his lips parting to show his teeth. "I was thinking more of The Tempest. Hell is empty, and all the devils are here." All the devils. The killer across from me. The twisted group that had taken my mother. 7 masters, a voice whispered in my memory. The Pythia, and 9. "From what I know of this collective," Redding said, "if they've had your mother for all these years, Without warning, he surged forward, bringing his face as close to mine as his chains would allow. She might be quite the devil herself. Chapter 2. The FBI agent at the door drew his sidearm the moment Redding lunged toward me. I stared at the killer's face, inches from mine. You want me to flinch? Violence was about power, about control, who had it and who didn't. I'm fine, I told my FBI escort. Agent Vance had worked with Agent Briggs off and on since I'd joined the Naturals program. He'd been tapped to stand guard because both Briggs and his partner, Agent Sterling, had decided to stay on the other side of the two-way mirror. They had a history with Daniel Redding, and right now, we wanted all of the psychopath's attention focused on me. He can't hurt me, I told Agent Vance, saying those words as much for my target's benefit as the agent's. He's just being melodramatic. Minimizing language, designed to keep Redding engaged in this game of verbal chess. I'd gotten him to admit that, at the very least, he knew of this group's existence. Now I needed to find out what he'd heard and who he'd heard it from. I needed to stay focused. No reason to get testy. Redding settled back in his seat and made a show of holding his cuffed hands up in a mea culpa for Vance, who holstered his sidearm. I am simply being candid. The edges of Redding's lips twisted as his attention returned to me. There are things that can break a person, and once broken, a person, such as your mother, can be formed into something new. Redding tilted his head to the side, his eyes heavy-lidded, as if he were caught in the midst of a particularly vivid daydream. Something magnificent. Who are they? I asked, refusing to take the bait. Where did you hear about them? There was a long pause. Say that I did know something. Redding's face stilled. His voice was neither soft nor loud as he continued. What would you give me in return? Redding was highly intelligent, calculating, sadistic. And he had only two obsessions. What you did to your victims, and Dean. My fingers curved into fists on the table. I knew what I had to do, and I knew, without question, that I was going to do it, no matter how sick it made me, no matter how much I didn't want to say the words. Dean reaches for me more now than he used to. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I forced myself to turn my left hand over and brought the fingers on my right hand to meet it. His fingers entwine with mine. And his thumb? I swallowed hard, my thumb making its way to my palm. His thumb draws tiny circles on the palm of my hand. Sometimes, he traces his fingers along the outside of mine. Sometimes, my voice caught in my throat. Sometimes, I run my fingers along his scars. I gave him those scars. The look on Redding's face told me that he was savoring my words, would savor them for a very long time. A ball of nausea rose in my throat. Keep going, Cassie. You have to. Dean dreams about you. The words felt like razor-edged sandpaper in my mouth, but I forced myself to continue. There are times when he wakes up from a nightmare and can't see what's right there in front of him because the only thing that he can see is you. Telling Dean's father these things wasn't just making a deal with the devil. This was selling my soul. It was dangerously close to selling Dean's. You won't tell my son what you had to do to get me to talk. Redding drummed his fingers along the tabletop, one after another. But every time he reaches for your hand, every time you touch his scars, you'll remember this conversation. I'll be there. Even if the boy doesn't know it, you will. Tell me what you know, I said, the words ripping their way out of my throat. Very well. Satisfaction played along the edges of Redding's lips. The group you're hunting looks for a specific type of killer. Someone who longs to be a part of something. A joiner. This was the monster, giving me my due. I'm not much of a joiner myself, Redding continued, but I am a listener. Over the years, I've heard rumors, whispers, urban legends, masters and apprentices, ritual and rules. He tilted his head slightly to one side, watching my reaction, as if he could see the workings of my brain and found them enticing. I know that each master chooses his own replacement. I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know who they are or where they're located. I leaned forward. But you did know that they took my mother. You knew she wasn't dead. I'm a man who sees patterns. Redding enjoyed talking about what kind of man he was, demonstrating his superiority to me, to the FBI, to Briggs and Sterling, whom he must have suspected were hiding behind the glass. Shortly after I was incarcerated, I became aware of another inmate. He'd been convicted of murdering his ex, but insisted she was still alive. There was never a body, you see, just a copious amount of blood. Too much, the prosecutors argued, for the victim to have lived. Those words were familiar enough to send a chill down my spine. My mother's dressing room, my hand fumbling for the light switch, my fingertips touching something sticky, something wet and warm, and... You suspected this group was involved? I could barely hear myself ask the question over the deafening beating of my own heart. One edge of Redding's mouth quirked upward. Every empire needs its queen. There was more to it than that. There had to be. Years later, Dean's father added, I was moved to take on an apprentice of my own. He'd taken on 3, but I knew which one he was referencing. Weber. The man had kidnapped me, loosed me in a forest, and hunted me. Like I was an animal, like I was prey. Weber brought me information about Dean, about Briggs, about you, and about Special Agent Lacey Locke. Locke, my original FBI mentor, had started life as Lacey Hobbs, my mother's younger sister. She'd ended life a serial killer, recreating my mother's murder over and over again. Not a murder, I reminded myself. The whole time Locke had been killing women in my mom's image, my mother had been alive. You found out the details of my mother's case. I focused as much as I could on the here and now, on Redding. You saw a connection. Whispers, rumors, urban legends. Redding fell back on what he'd said before. Masters and apprentices, rituals and rules, and at the center of it all, a woman. His eyes gleamed. A very specific kind of woman. My lips and tongue and throat were dry. So dry, I almost couldn't force out the words. What kind? The kind of woman who could be formed into something magnificent. Redding closed his eyes, his voice humming with pleasure. Something new. You take the knife. Step by step, you make your way to the stone table, testing the balance of the blade in your hand. The wheel is turning. The offering turns with it, chained to the stone, body and soul. All must be tested. You say the words as you drag the flat of the knife across the offering's neck. All must be found worthy. Power thrums through your veins. This is your decision, your choice. One twist of your wrist, and blood will flow. The wheel will stop. But without order, there's chaos. Without order, there is pain. What do you need? You lean down as you whisper the ancient words. The knife in your hand angles into the base of the offering's neck. You could kill him, but it would cost you 7 days and 7 pains. The wheel never stops turning for long. What do I need? The offering repeats the question, smiling as blood streams down his naked chest. I need 9. Chapter 3. Well, that was cheerful. Leah jumped off the table she'd been sitting on. Agent Vance had just delivered me to the observation area. Sterling and Briggs still had their twin gazes fixed on the room I'd vacated a few moments earlier. On the other side of the two-way mirror, guards pulled Daniel Redding to his feet. Briggs, competitive and ambitious, and, in his own way, idealistic, would never view Redding as anything other than a monster, a threat. Sterling was more restrained, the type who kept her emotions on lockdown by following preset rules, including one that said that men like Daniel Redding didn't get to chip away at her control. I swear, Leah continued with a wave of her hand. Serial killers are so predictable. It's always all, I want to watch you suffer, and let me quote Shakespeare while I imagine dancing on your corpse. The fact that Leah was being so dismissive told me that the conversation she'd just witnessed had gotten to her almost as much as it had gotten to me. Was he lying? I asked. No matter how hard I'd pressed, Redding had insisted he didn't know the name of the inmate whose ex's death had resembled my mother's. But I knew better than to take a master of manipulation at his word. Redding might know more than he's saying, Leah told me. But he's not lying. Or at least he's not lying about ye old consortium of serial-killing psychopaths. He did stretch the truth a little about wanting to watch said psychopaths have their way with you. Of course Redding doesn't want to watch. I tried to match Leah's flippant tone in an attempt to make this, any of it, matter less. He's Daniel Redding. He wants to kill me himself. Leah arched one eyebrow. You do seem to have that effect on people. I snorted. Considering not one, but 2 different serial killers had targeted me since I'd joined the Naturals program, I couldn't exactly argue the point. We'll track down the case Redding was talking about. Briggs finally turned to face Leah and me. It might take some time, but if there's an inmate who matches Redding's description, we'll find him. Agent Sterling laid a hand on my shoulder. You did what you needed to do in there, Cassie. Dean would understand that. Of course he would. That didn't make it better. It made it worse. As for what Redding said about your mother... Are we done here? Leah asked abruptly, cutting off Agent Sterling. I knew better than to aim a grateful look in Leah's direction, but I appreciated the interference all the same. I didn't want to discuss the insinuations Redding had made about my mother. I didn't want to wonder if there was even a grain of truth to them, no matter how small. My mentor got the message. As she led the way out, Agent Sterling didn't try to broach the subject again. Leah wove one arm casually through mine. For the record, she said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. If you ever want to talk, my brain filled in, need to vent. Ever, she repeated softly, her voice ringing with sincerity. Make me listen to you recount the erotic hand-holding adventures of Cassie and Dean again? I will exact vengeance, and that vengeance will be epic. Next to deception detection, Leah's biggest specialty was providing distractions, some of which came with collateral damage. What kind of vengeance? I asked, halfway grateful for the diversion, but also fairly certain that this was one time that she wasn't bluffing. Leah smirked and let go of my arm. Wouldn't you like to know? Chapter 4. We arrived home to find Sloane in the kitchen, cuddling a blowtorch. Luckily, Sterling and Briggs were still outside, exchanging words not meant for our ears. Leah arched an eyebrow at me. Do you want to ask, or should I? Sloane tilted her head to the side. There's a high probability that you're going to inquire about this blowtorch. I obliged. What are you doing with that blowtorch? The earliest flamethrowers date back to the Byzantine Empire in the 1st century AD, Sloane chirped. The words exited her mouth quickly enough to raise a red flag. I amended my question. What are you doing with that blowtorch, and who gave you caffeine? Michael chose that exact moment to saunter into the kitchen carrying a fire extinguisher. You're alarmed, he said, taking in the expression on my face. Also, mildly concerned I've lost my mind. He let his gaze travel to Leah. And you're not in the mood to have my emotions read? Leah hopped up on the kitchen counter and allowed her legs to dangle, her dark eyes glittering as something passed unspoken between them. Michael held her gaze for a moment longer. That. I thought you were fundamentally opposed to giving Sloane caffeine, I said, shooting Michael a look. I am, he replied, most of the time. But you know what the song says. It's my 3-day-long party, and I'll caffeinate my Sloane if I want to. Your party, I repeated. As in your birthday? Michael gave me his most austere look. 2 days from now, I, Michael Alexander Thomas Townsend, will be a year older, a year wiser, and certainly old enough to supervise Sloane's use of the blowtorch. What's the harm in starting the festivities a little early? I heard what Michael wasn't saying. You're turning 18. I knew what that would mean for him. Freedom. From your family. From the man who turned you into a person who can spot even a hint of temper on a smiling face. As if on cue, Michael's phone rang. I couldn't read his face the way he could read mine, but I knew instinctively that Michael's father wasn't the kind of person who could just sit back and watch his last days of control tick by. You won't answer, I thought, my focus still on Michael. He can't make you. And 2 days from now, he won't ever be able to make you do anything again. Heaven forbid I be the responsible one. Leah slid off the counter and sauntered over to stand nose to nose with Michael. But maybe Sloane shouldn't set stuff on fire. I have to, Sloane objected vehemently. Michael's birthday is March 31st. That's in 2 days, and 2 days after that is... April 2nd, I finished for her. 4-2. I could feel everything that Daniel Redding had said, about the Masters, about my mother, rushing back. The last 10 weeks of dead ends on its heels. 9 victims killed every 3 years on dates determined by the Fibonacci sequence. That was the Masters' MO. It had been just over a week since the last Fibonacci date, March 21. The next was April 2. We know the pattern, Sloane continued fiercely. It starts this calendar year, and once it does, the new initiate will burn people alive. I've read everything I can find on arson investigation, but... Sloane looked down at the blowtorch, her grip on it tightening. It isn't enough. Sloane's brother had been killed in Vegas by the unsub who'd turned us onto this group. She wasn't just vulnerable right now. She was bleeding. You need to feel useful. Because if you couldn't save Aaron, what use are you to anyone? What use could you ever be again? I understood now why Michael had given Sloane coffee and gone for a fire extinguisher instead of confiscating the blowtorch. I slipped an arm around her. She leaned into me. A voice spoke up behind us. "You're back." All four of us turned. Dean didn't bat an eye at Sloane's blowtorch. 100% of his attention was focused on Leah and me. Our absence had definitely been noted. Given where we had been, and the fact that Dean shared my knack for profiling, that did not bode well. "We're back," Leah declared, stepping between Dean and me. "Do you want to see what I let Cassie talk me into buying at the lingerie store?" Dean and Leah had been the first two naturals in the program. They'd been together for years before any of the rest of us had arrived on the scene. She was, in every way but blood, his sister. Dean shuddered. "I will pay you $50 never to say the word lingerie in my presence again." Leah smirked. "No deal. Now." She turned back to the rest of us. "I believe someone said something about recreational pyrotechnics." Before Dean could veto that suggestion, the front door opened. I heard footsteps, 2 pairs of them, coming toward the kitchen, and assumed that they belonged to Sterling and Briggs. I was only half right. Briggs wasn't accompanied by Agent Sterling. He was accompanied by Agent Sterling's father. Director Sterling wasn't in the habit of making house calls. "What's going on?" Dean beat me to the punch. His manner was non-confrontational, but it was no secret that when Director Sterling looked at Dean, he saw Dean's father. The FBI director was perfectly willing to use the son of a serial killer, but he didn't trust Dean, and never would. "I received a call from Thatcher Townsend this morning." Director Sterling's words sucked the oxygen out of the room. "I haven't been answering my phone this week," Michael commented, his voice deceptively pleasant. "So he called yours." Before the director could respond, Agent Sterling arrived with Judd on her heels. Months ago, Judd Hawkins, who kept us fed and in one piece on a day-to-day basis, had also been given oversight of when and how the Naturals program was used. Director Sterling wasn't the type of person who appreciated oversight. He believed in acceptable costs and calculated risks, especially if the calculations were his. "Townsend Sr. turned me on to a case," Director Sterling said, addressing those words to Briggs and ignoring his daughter and Judd altogether. "I'd like you to take a look at it." "Now?" Briggs asked. The subtext there was clear. "We have our first lead on the Masters in months, and you want us to do Michael's abusive father a favor now?" "What Thatcher Townsend wants," Michael said tightly, "Thatcher Townsend gets." Agent Sterling took a step toward him. "Michael." He brushed past her and out of the room, that same deceptively pleasant smile plastered to his face. Briggs's jaw clenched as he turned back to the director. "What case?" "There's a situation with Townsend's business partner's daughter," the director replied calmly. "And given his support of the Naturals program, he would like us to look into it." "His support of the program?" Leah repeated incredulously. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the man more or less sell Michael to you in exchange for immunity from prosecution on a laundry list of white-collar crimes?" Director Sterling ignored Leah. "It would behoove us," he told Briggs, each word issued with precision, "to consider taking this case. I believe that decision is mine." Judd's words were just as precise and just as uncompromising as the director's. A former Marine sniper would have struck most people as an odd choice of house mother for a bunch of teenagers in an FBI training program. But Judd would have taken a bullet for any of us.
"Michael's father hits him,"
Sloane blurted out. She had no filter, no protective layer to keep her raw spots from the world. Judd met Sloane's wide blue eyes for a moment, then held up a hand.
"Everyone under the age of 21, out."
None of us moved.
"I'm not going to ask you twice,"
Judd said, his voice low. I could count on one hand the number of times I'd heard that tone in his voice. We moved. On my way out, Agent Briggs caught my arm.
"Find Michael,"
he told me quietly.
"and make sure he doesn't do anything."
"Michaelish?" I suggested. Briggs eyed Director Sterling.
"Ill-advised."
Chapter 5. We found Michael in the basement. When the FBI had purchased the house that served as our base of operations, they'd converted the bottom floor into a lab. Model crime scenes lined the walls. A quick scan of the room told me that Michael hadn't set anything on fire. Yet. Instead, Michael stood at the far end of the room, facing a wall that had been papered from ceiling to floor with photographs. The master's victims. I'd spent hundreds of hours down here, staring at that wall the way Michael was now. As I came to stand beside him, my gaze went automatically to two photos set apart from the rest. One was a picture of a skeleton the authorities had found buried at a crossroads. The other was a photograph of my mother, taken shortly before she'd disappeared. When the police had uncovered the remains in the first picture, the working theory had been that they were my mom's. Eventually, we'd discovered that my mother was alive, and that she was the one who'd killed our Jane Doe. "All are tested," a voice said from somewhere in my memory. "All must be found worthy." That was what one of the masters, a serial killer known as Nightshade, had told me when we'd captured him. The Pythia was forced to prove her worth by fighting her predecessor to the death. "Masters and apprentices," I could hear Daniel Redding saying lightly. "Rituals and rules, and at the center of it all, a woman." Dean laid a hand on my shoulder. I forced myself to turn and meet his eyes, hoping he wouldn't see the naked vulnerability in mine. Casting a glance at Dean and me, Leah walked up behind Michael and snaked an arm around his stomach, pulling him close. Dean narrowed his eyes at the two of them. "We're on again," Leah informed us. "In a very big and, might I add, overtly physical way." I knew better than to take Leah at her word, but Sloane played right into her hands.
"Since when?"
Michael never tore his gaze from the wall. "Remember when Leah slammed me up against that wall in Vegas?" It occurred to me then that Leah might not be lying. "You've been together since Vegas and none of us knew?" I tried to wrap my mind around that. "You live in a house with 3 profilers and a Marine sniper. How—" "Stealth, deception, and an excellent sense of balance," Michael said, preempting the question. Then he glanced at Leah. "I thought you didn't want anyone to know." The weight of our treachery was weighing on my soul. Leah deadpanned. In other words, she wanted to distract Dean from thinking too hard about what was going on with me. And if she could also take Michael's mind off the chain of events that had brought him down here, all the better. "I'm not really in the mood to be distracted," Michael commented. He knew Leah. Biblically. He knew exactly what she was doing, and right now, some part of him didn't want to be saved from the dark place. He turned back to the wall. "I love you," Leah said softly. There was something intense in her tone, something vulnerable. No muss, no fuss, no misdirection. Even when I don't want to, I do. Despite himself, Michael whirled back around to face her. Leah fluttered her eyelashes. I love you like a drowning man loves air. I love you like the ocean loves the sand. I love you like peanut butter loves jelly. And I want to have your babies. Michael snorted. Shut up. Leah smirked. I had you going there for a second. Michael studied her expression, beyond the smirk, beyond the mask. Maybe you did. The thing about Leah that made her so difficult to read was that she would have said the exact same thing with the exact same smirk regardless of what she felt. She would have said it if she was falling in love with him. She would have said it if she was just jerking his chain. Question. Michael held up his index finger. I know why Leah is looking particularly pleased with herself, and why Cassie's wearing her profiling face, and I could make an educated guess about why Redding looks downright constipated every time Leah touches me. But why is Sloane wildly avoiding my gaze and shifting her weight to the balls of her feet like the effort of not saying something might actually cause her to explode? Sloane made her best attempt at looking inconspicuous. There are over 197 commonly used slang terms for a male's private parts, she blurted out. And then, because she just couldn't help herself, she continued. Also, Briggs, Sterling, and Judd are not up there debating the merits of taking your father's case. There was a beat of silence. As much as it pains me to say this, let's table the discussion of inappropriate slang for a moment. Michael's gaze went from Sloane to Leah, Dean, and me. And someone can elaborate on this case of my father's. Director Sterling wasn't specific. Dean answered Michael's query, calm and ready to intervene if Michael tried to do something stupid. All he said is that there's some kind of situation with your father's business partner's daughter. Michael blinked. Celine? The name lingered on his lips for a second or two. What kind of situation? Michael must have been able to tell just from looking at us that we didn't know the answer to that question, because the next instant he made for the basement door, every muscle in his body taut. Dean caught his arm as he passed. Think, Townsend. I am thinking, Michael countered, stepping forward to get in Dean's face. Specifically, I'm thinking that you have 3 seconds to remove your hand from my arm before I make you remove it. Michael! I tried and failed to get him to look at me. 1, Michael told Dean. I do hope he says 2 next, Leah told Sloane wistfully. Nothing says virility in a man like misplaced anger and counting to the number 3. That pierced Michael's bravado enough that he actually paused. Celine Delacroix is the only person from my life before the program who ever gave a crap about me or bothered to see the kind of person that the great Thatcher Townsend really is, he told Dean. If she's in some kind of trouble, I'm going. If I have to go through you to do it, I will. We're all going. Agent Briggs didn't mince words as he descended the basement stairs. He was the one who had recruited Michael to the program. He knew exactly what kind of man Thatcher Townsend was. So why would he send Michael back there? Why would Judd agree? The fact that Agent Sterling wasn't with Briggs made me wonder if she'd fought them on this. You're telling me that we're just breaking camp and flying to upstate New York? Leah narrowed her eyes at Briggs. Out of the goodness of our hearts? Not out of the goodness of our hearts, and not because Director Sterling thinks Townsend Sr. could prove useful down the road. Briggs looked to Michael.
Not even because a 19-year-old girl is missing, although we shouldn't stop caring about things like that, no matter how focused we are on taking the Masters down.
The word missing hit Michael like a physical blow.
Then why?
He asked. Why would Director Sterling bring us this case? Why would Briggs and Judd willingly bring Michael back into his abusive father's sphere? Why would we drop everything to look for one girl? I knew the answer in the pit of my stomach before Briggs said,
Because the police believe Celine was abducted 8 days ago.
My heart thudded in my chest. 8 days since the last Fibonacci date. 5 days until the next one.
March 21st.
Sloane's voice caught in her throat.
3/21.
This girl disappeared on a Fibonacci date. Leah must have sensed Briggs was holding something back, because she tilted her head to the side.
And?
There was a long pause.
This girl disappeared on a Fibonacci date, Briggs repeated. And the entire crime scene was soaked in kerosene.
You. The smell of burning flesh never really leaves you. Ash scatters, skin scars, pain subsides, but the smell is always there. Pushing back against it, you concentrate. You know this slow and painful dance. You know the rules, but even as the wheel turns, the music changes. You can hear it. This time, you know something that the others don't. You know her. Chapter 6. Maybe Celine Delacroix was still alive. Maybe she hadn't been doused in kerosene. Maybe the person who had abducted her from her home hadn't burned her alive on March 21st. But that wasn't a risk we could take. The entire team, plus agents Starmans and Vance, were on the jet and flying to upstate New York in under an hour. Near the front of the plane, Briggs checked his watch. Across the aisle from him, Agent Sterling thumbed through a copy of the case file, like she hadn't already memorized the entire thing. The lengths the two of them were going to in order to avoid eye contact might have triggered my interest if I hadn't been more focused on the fact that Celine Delacroix might be victim number 1 of 9. I felt the weight of that pressing down on me, suffocating me. Beside me, Dean's fingers brushed the tips of mine. Every time he reaches for your hand, I heard Daniel Redding whisper in my memory. Every time you touch his scars. I jerked my hand back.
Cassie?
I'm fine, I said, falling back on a childhood habit and focusing on assessing the other occupants of the plane. Michael sat in a row by himself, Sloane and Leah side by side across the aisle. Near the front of the plane, behind Sterling and Briggs, Agent Vance, short, compact, by the book, and pushing 40. And Agent Starmans, recently divorced, unlucky in love, and deeply uncomfortable with teenagers who saw more than they should, awaited orders. They'd been a part of Briggs's team since before I'd joined the program, but hadn't started traveling with us until after Vegas. Until every single one of us became a possible target. That just left Judd. I could tell by the way he was sitting that he was armed. The plane hit cruising altitude before I could think too hard about why. Agent Sterling stood and ditched the file in her hand for a digital version displayed on the flat screen at the front of the plane.
Celine Elodie Delacroix, 19-year-old daughter of Remy and Elise Delacroix.
Agent Sterling began the briefing like this was any other day and any other case.
Remy is a hedge fund manager. Elise runs the family's charitable foundation.
Agent Sterling didn't say a word about the Masters or the Delacroix family's connection to Michael. I took my cue from her, setting aside conjecture in favor of focusing on the pictures on the screen. My first impression was that Celine Delacroix was the kind of girl who could make anything look elegant, while giving off the general impression that she thought elegance was overrated. In the first picture, she wore her black hair wavy and chopped in artistic layers, the longest reaching past her chest, and the shortest barely brushing the bottom of her chin. Her black cocktail dress was form-fitting, and a gold medallion, most likely vintage, brought out the rich undertone of her brown skin. In the second picture, Celine's dark hair spiraled out around her head in seemingly endless curls. Black pants, white blouse, red heels. My mind cataloged the details, even as I turned my attention to the final picture. Celine's tight curls were pulled into a loose bun on the top of her head, and her white t-shirt hung purposefully off both shoulders, revealing a white tank underneath. You wear solid colors, not prints. You're always aware of the camera. Agent Sterling continued.
Celine was reported missing by her college roommate when she didn't return to campus after spring break.
Which campus? Michael asked. I wondered why he was asking. I wondered why, if he and Celine had been at all close, he didn't already know.
Yale.
Agent Briggs was the one who answered Michael's question.
According to police interviews, Celine's friends were under the impression that she was joining them for a spring break trip to St. Lucia, but she canceled at the last minute and went home instead.
Why? I wondered. Did someone ask you to? Did something happen?
Our victim was reported missing by her college roommate.
Sloane brought her feet up onto her seat and rested her chin on her knees.
It's statistically unlikely that such a report would be made immediately. The percentage of college students who return late from breaks increases in a curvilinear fashion as the school year proceeds to its close.
Agent Sterling recognized the question inherent in Sloane's statistic.
The report was made yesterday morning, after Celine's roommate had been unable to get a hold of her for 3 days straight, and Mr. and Mrs. Delacroix confirmed that they hadn't heard from their daughter in several weeks.
A muscle ticked in Michael's jaw.
They didn't even know she went home, did they?
No, Agent Briggs replied evenly.
It appears Celine's parents were abroad at the time.
I integrated that into what I knew about our victim's last-minute trip home. Did you know no one would be there? Did your parents even bother to tell you they would be gone?
If she wasn't reported missing until the 28th.
Sloane did the math and zeroed in on the money question.
How do we know she disappeared on the 21st?
Agent Sterling clicked forward to the next slide in her presentation.
Security footage,
she clarified as a split-screen video began to play.
12 cameras.
Sloane cataloged them instantly.
Based on the coverage and the length of the hallways, I'd estimate the house is a minimum of 9,000 square feet.
Sterling enlarged footage of what appeared to be an in-home art studio. Celine Delacroix was visible, smack dab in the middle of the frame. The date on the footage was March 21. You were painting something. As I watched Celine, I tried to sink further and further into her perspective. For you, painting is a whole-body endeavor. You move like you're dancing. You paint like it's a combat sport. The footage on the screen was black and white, but the resolution was excellent. You wipe the sweat from your brow with the back of your hand. There's paint on your arms, your face. You take a step back and... Without warning, the footage jumped. 1 second, Celine was on screen, painting, and the next there was shattered glass everywhere. A broken easel lay on the floor. The entire studio had been ransacked. And Celine was gone. Chapter 7. Sterling and Briggs spent the remainder of the flight showing us crime scene photos and briefing us on the facts of the case. One thing was clear. Our victim had fought. She was stronger than you expected. I shifted my focus from Celine to the unsub. You either lost control or you never had it. You weren't ready, weren't worthy. That was guesswork as much as profiling. I needed to see the actual crime scene. I needed to stand where Celine had been standing. I needed to know her, to see her bedroom, examine her paintings, sort out exactly what kind of fighter she was.
We'll set up our base of operations at a nearby safe house.
As the plane began its descent, Agent Briggs laid out the plan.
Agent Starmans and Judd will accompany the Naturals to the safe house. Agent Vance, you're with us.
Us, as in Briggs and Sterling. They'd scout out the scene and major players before we were allowed anywhere near the case.
Is this a bad time to point out that I'm on the verge of turning 18?
Michael asked. It was the first time he'd spoken since Agent Sterling had concluded her briefing. For Michael, that might have been a record.
Redding's 18. God knows when Leah's birthday actually is, but I think we can all agree that she doesn't need kid gloves. I cannot help noticing that you did not mention Cassie or me, Sloane told Michael, frowning. I do not care for gloves of the kid or adult variety. Mittens can serve up to 23% more heat. None of you are coming with us.
Agent Briggs was used to issuing orders.
The 5 of you are going to the safe house. We will deal you in on a need-to-know basis once the crime scene has been secured. So what I'm hearing, Michael replied as the plane touched down, is that this is a good time to remind you that I am the only person here who knows Celine, the Delacroix family, or the local police department?
One guess as to how Townsend knows the local police department, Dean murmured beside me. The debate continued as we deplaned, until Briggs snapped.
Michael, what are the chances that I'm going to change my mind?
Slim to none, Michael guessed flippantly.
Infinitesimal to none,
Sloane corrected. Michael shrugged as he descended the stairs to stand on the runway.
What are the chances that I'll do something stupid if you don't let me come, Agent Tight Pants?
Briggs didn't reply, which told me that Michael's threat had landed. Agent Sterling stepped in front of Michael before he could say anything else. Briggs understands more than you think, she told him softly. She didn't provide any context for that statement, but I found myself wondering how Briggs had grown up, if he had first-hand experience with Thatcher Townsend's brand of parenting. There was a long silence as Michael tried to ignore whatever emotions he saw on Sterling's face. Agent Starmans, who'd been on our protection detail more than once in the last 10 weeks, cleared his throat.
I'd really prefer you didn't make me spend my afternoon forcing you to stay put, he told Michael.
Michael offered him a dazzling smile.
And I'd prefer if you didn't peruse online dating profiles on your work phone.
He winked at the mortified agent.
Dilated pupils, slight smile, followed by visible agonizing about how to compose just the right message. It's a dead giveaway every time.
Starmans clamped his mouth shut and strode to stand next to Agent Vance.
Now, that was just mean, Leah commented. Who?
Michael countered.
Me?
I knew him well enough to know that if he decided to do something stupid, Starmans wouldn't be able to stop him. When you're hurting, you hurt yourself. I wanted to stop there, but couldn't, because I knew exactly where Michael's love affair with self-destruction came from. If you can't keep someone from hitting you, you make them hit you, because at least then you know it's coming. At least then you know what to expect. Turning away from Michael before he could read the expression on my face, I saw a row of gleaming black Mercedes SUVs parked at the edge of the private airstrip. 4 of them. A closer inspection revealed that the keys were in the ignitions and that each of the 4 had been stocked with sparkling soda and fresh fruit.
No warm nuts,
Leah commented, her voice dry.
And they call this hospitality.
Michael offered her his most careless smile.
I'm sure my father will remedy any disappointment. We Townsends pride ourselves on hospitality.
Your father arranged for transportation. 4 SUVs when 2 would do. I tried not to read too much into the way Michael had grouped himself in with his father. Like Townsend men were Townsends first, and anything else was a distant second, no matter how far they'd run.
We're not visiting dignitaries, Briggs said flatly. We're not clients Thatcher Townsend needs to woo. This is a federal investigation. The local field office is perfectly capable of supplying us with a car.
Sloane raised her hand.
Will that car have 3 rows of airbags, a 7-speed automatic transmission, and a 550 horsepower engine?
Leah raised her hand.
Will that car have warm nuts? Enough, Sterling declared. She turned toward Michael. I think I speak for everyone here when I say that I don't care about your father's hospitality, except insofar as it tells me that he's grandiose, prone to unnecessary gestures, and seems to have conveniently forgotten the fact that we've already seen behind the man behind the curtain. We know exactly what he is.
Behind the curtain? Michael said loftily, striding toward the farthest SUV. What curtain? My father would be the first to tell you. With Townsend's, what you see is what you get. He pulled the keys out of the ignition and tossed them in the air, catching them lazily in one hand. Based on the set of Agent Sterling's mouth, not to mention those impressively deep brow ridges Agent Briggs is working, I have inferred that the FBI won't be accepting dear old Dad's gesture of goodwill. Michael gave the keys another toss. But I will. His tone dared Sterling and Briggs to argue with him.
I call shotgun.
Judd knew how to pick his battles. My gut said that, on some level, he knew that Michael saw accepting his father's gifts as akin to taking punches. You take whatever he dishes out. You take and you take and you take, because you can. Because people would expect you to turn down his gifts out of spite. Because anything you could take from him, you would. Michael caught my gaze. He always knew when I was profiling him. After a long moment, he spoke. It appears we're going to the safe house. Judd's got shotgun. Leah? He tossed her the keys. You're driving.